reason, like an issue-based reason, or a kind of ethical or political reason, but it can also just be who's in the room with you, who's on your team, what kind of communities are you building with coworkers. It could be working across sectors, which is a big one for me in my work, and it could be the work itself. So just a minute per person on what keeps you in this work, and then see what kinds of conversations come out of that. We'll have about 15 minutes total, so it can be informal. A couple of things to think about in terms of just how these groups can run. It would be great if someone can volunteer to keep track of time. And that way, if all of a sudden you realize 10 minutes have gone by and 2 people have not spoken, you can just point that out. Also, again, like I mentioned in December, if you're the person who tends to talk a lot right away, just to make sure that other people get a chance to have their voice in the mix. So that acronyms I use are like me plus 3, meaning if I talk, I'm gonna wait for 3 other people to talk before I talk again. And then just to monitor, like, if you're talking to a group of new colleagues or people you haven't worked with before, I know I sometimes have the tendency to like say something, say it again and repeat it to make sure people got it, and trust that if you leave space for people to ask questions, even with regard to a very personal story, that will allow everyone to kind of mix in more freely. And then the last thing I'll say is if someone in each group could take on the role of note taker, that would be fantastic. Because what we'll do is after 15 minutes, we'll bring everyone back and just debrief to do a little recall of like what was impactful from you for these sessions. Are there any questions about this first breakout? Okay, Alexis, I think you can you're sending people in, right?
Yep, doing it now.
Okay.
Hey, all.
Hey, Brad.
Andrew, you back in the UP?
I am.
Or you got a different background?
Yeah, I have the library background, or our family library with her.
Yeah.
You can't see all the books. It's just all the stuff the kids put on the walls.
And I'm packed into my office because I'm having new floors installed. And so the other thing is piled up either in the back room or out here with me. This is a.
I was going to say you're right next to the refrigerator. So.
I'll try to take some notes, but if somebody else could also do it, because I'm a terrible note taker. Half the time I write stuff down that later on I can't understand what I meant by that. I'd appreciate it. And we had some ideas of you know how to approach this first breakout about if everybody has a story that they can tell about you know some kind of climate energy equity story about why we're here, why we're participating in the work group as a whole, and then and this particular subject matter. So anybody who wants to go first, and I'll kind of try to keep track of the clock too.
I'll be glad to throw out a very recent story that I'm still working with, but I get a call from a customer, an elderly lady that has never contacted the utility before except to set up the account. Been a customer since the early 90s, and she was reaching out because she is excited about solar, energy efficiency, and heat pumps. And her furnace was failing and dripping water, and she doesn't want to ask for assistance, but she is living on less than $10,000 a year and paying all of her bills on time and everything else. And just having multiple conversations with her and working through that is part of what keeps me going, because I'm working to help her get new heating systems or fix her heating systems, better insulation. And one of the struggles is that she has grown up in an era where you don't ask for assistance if you can find some way to pay for yourself. And I've actually even had this conversation with Ann Cusack, because we're trying to find out how to get her assistance without having her to go through the formal SER or MDHHS state emergency relief funding, because she won't apply. She outright refuses to apply. So it's a struggle, but I can see the benefit for her life, and for her freedom to be able to do more with what little she has. So that's what keeps me going. And as I said, it's energy and efficiency related. Maybe not equity, unless you're looking at it as on the low income or income equity levels. And climate related, she's in a part of the UP that gets 300 inches of snow a year.
You wanna?
It's not hard to guess, but yeah, she's living in an area where 3 years ago she told me she unplugged her refrigerator and used her entryway as her refrigerator to save a total of $150. And then refused when I offered to give her a brand new energy efficient refrigerator replacement, because it's not her belief to replace something that could be fixed or that is working. So it's an uphill struggle, but it's building that relationship and going through those pieces. So one person, one step at a time is the approach that I have to take with some of these customers. So I'll turn it over because I've gone over my minute time. So thank you, Brad.
Sure.
Brad, I can build on that.
Go.
Because we just had a recent similar experience. A gentleman wanted solar, and he's living in a trailer, and goes. It's a sad story, but we had to convince him that solar wasn't really the way to go for him at this particular time, and got him signed up for our low-income program, and got him a bunch of bulbs, and started talking about other options for him. But that challenge is there. People are fiercely proud, and especially elderly people. And boy, Andrew, I get it in the UP. I mean, that's, I haven't lived there when I was young and low income with a baby. I understand that resistance to applying for help. So for me, keeping going is just finding the ways to network. It's kind of hard for me now because I'm a boots on the ground kind of gal, getting out in the community, but fortunately we still are able to Zoom meeting with important community members who are all concentrating on the same issue. You know, Lansing has a high population of low-income residents, and our rental, we've a lot of rentals. So being able to, you know, just keep bringing experience and passion to helping people, many who don't know what's available to them. And it's just one overall comment for what, you know, the area we all work in, trying to simplify the process to get people involved, I think it is something serious we need to address, because it's very daunting. And, you know, in the past, I was involved in programs in the UP and to Detroit where we replaced furnaces, and it was like snap, we did it. So people didn't have to go through that process. So there's all different angles and ways to do things, and just keeping that can-do attitude. I love Andrew up in the UP doing that. And we try to do it here in Lansing. I'm done.
Thank you. Will or Tom, got anything?
Sure, yeah. I used to work for a rebate implementation company, and now run a small energy efficiency company, mostly doing lighting supply. And I have a pretty similar outlook. Is this audio coming through? Okay. And yeah, it just, it's, I mean, I guess I kind of struck out on my own so that I could have a little more flexibility in trying to communicate the message and explain to people the resources that are available. And I kind of, I think the rebate programs are doing the best they can, but they still ultimately have a kind of a PR problem. People don't want to take the help. They don't understand the help. And so I kind of see it as my mission to make the paperwork as easy as possible for people and to pitch it in a way that is more palatable. So yeah, I've got a free light bulb program going in a few municipalities. And I just basically send people to a PDF where I've highlighted the fields they have to fill out, and I just try and make it as easy as possible. And I believe strongly, as the I forgot the guy's name who was talking earlier about, you know, what might motivate us. So I do believe strongly in taking care of each other and the sort of social political ramifications of all that. I actually got started working for Habitat out in Washington State, and that sort of desire to help people who are in need, who are our brothers and sisters, is kind of stuck with me the whole time. So that's what motivates me and keeps me coming back. Thank you.
Yeah, I got plenty of motivations. I suppose I've been doing this stuff for quite a long time. But just one example, we're building a habitat house years ago, and I've been a volunteer since 89 or 90, and a staff person since 2003 at both the local affiliate and now at the state. Anyway, we're building this house, and this lady, the next door neighbor, comes over. She's bringing cookies and everything, and then, you know, we struck up a conversation. She goes, "Oh, I'd really like, God, I'd love some new countertops. Any way we can get some new countertops?" And sure, we could come over and, you know, so we never even really looked at her house, but we look up and she had just had her house re-roofed, and the shingles were literally sliding off the house, right?
Good Lord.
So whatever program that was, you know, it was, I mean, the lowest bid was probably a joke, but literally brand new shingles sliding off the roof. We go inside the house. It was absolutely astounding. She hadn't had a working sink in 15 years. She'd been doing her dishes in the tub, which is the only running water she had. I think the furnace was functioning, but it had one heat duct into the middle of the house somewhere. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And her priority was cabinets. I mean, countertops. She just wanted new countertops, you know. And and we could see that over all the years that she's lived there, we could see all these programs that had come in there, from WAP to who knows what, including the roof job, you know. And everybody came in and did what their little silo required, got it done. In many cases, especially with WAP back in those days, made the house much worse, totally unhealthy, sealed it up tight, and it was totally a contaminated house. I mean, so you could see all these programs that had come in, brand new water heater, ironically, that ran one fixture at the tub. And it just really reinforced my belief that we can do much better than that. And that's what I think is so cool about EWR. I mean, we're having these conversations, you know, we all have our little slots that we're supposed to achieve, but we've got to figure out how to do this together. And so we go in there and there's this whole concept of one touch, you know, we go in there and we do this, and then something else happens, and we go in there and we do that. And you think about what society has invested in these families, and how much of that has been wasted in the pursuit of singular goals. It's you know, there's some way we can do this, and we could spend 3 times the value of that house, making that house right for that family one time. And I can guarantee you, no, I can't because I haven't done the math, but I suspect that as a society, it would be a money saver for us to do so, if only for the improvement in healthcare. If we didn't even factor any other factors, and think about what asthma costs, and think about the number of families, in those households with terrible asthma and stuff. So anyway, sorry, but that's what keeps me going every day. Keeps me awake at night too.
I agree wholeheartedly. And that one touch to a house has been the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I think I agree with that too.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to talk to you afterwards about your math, because that's a part, no, it's an issue I'm working on right now for our program. And I think your experience would be very helpful. So we'll talk afterwards, but thank you.
So for me, my perspective has changed a whole lot since we started doing this. We kicked off this low income work group, because it was really, coming from the PSC perspective, I was utility focused. And over the course of the last couple of years, not only have I gotten to, thinking about, like Tom said, with the how to coordinate all these other programs and bringing everybody together, the weatherization program, the folks at Habitat, the EWR programs from the various utilities, and how to coordinate and bring them all together. But also, when we've had a couple of meetings, like when we've gone down to Detroit a couple of times, where it was not just sitting at in Lansing at the PSC talking about this stuff, but when I get to interact with people who are much more, as Eileen said, boots on the ground people than I have a tendency to be when I'm sitting in the office, and which has been really helpful for me in the way that I think about stuff and my perspective. Which the stuff from the December meeting, and we had a couple meetings to prepare for the December meeting, and this one kind of has helped me with my perspective. And there was a lot of stuff that I just didn't know about. I mean, honest to God, I'd never even heard the term redlining before. They had to explain it to me. Brianna Parker and Brianna Dubose, because I didn't know. So, we're almost out of time. And so this has been, it changes the way that I think about my job. And I think that that's all for the good. So we've got still got 40 seconds left. So that's, and as Andrew said, kind of taking baby steps, one client at a time, try to figure it out as we go. I think we're slowly but surely getting better at it. Certainly better than it used to be, I think.
I'm just glad we're talking about it. We're talking about this stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
It's getting it off the ground, and learning how to educate yourself.
Well, we have.
That's perfect.
Sarah, sorry about that. I don't know how I ended up back in the main room in the middle of your.
No problem.
Okay. I got people. So I think we have a couple more rooms that just are coming back and closing up. Hey, Alexis, are we recording the chat also? Will we save that?
Well, when we get to the end, I'm going to cut and paste the whole thing.
Great.
And put it into a Word document.
Okay. So I think we're waiting for a few more, but could we start just sharing either verbally or in the chat to begin with what came out of your groups that were helpful in however you define helpful?
Well, I know I was in group 14 in our group,
thought maybe the prompt was about how we were drawn into this, this topic, this area. It was interesting to see, we had the National Housing Trust, Blue Green Alliance, and we had DT representative and myself at the AG's office. Just talked about, the different, things that brought us, or our interest in this area. A lot of it obviously work related, that brought us into these areas. And, people talked about, I know for the National Housing Trust, Annika talked about how after Floyd and stuff are focused on race equity. And then the Blue Green Alliance talked about, again, housing equity and how fundamental it is. And even DTE talked about, how they serve a community that's, diverse, and how they, have focused on diversifying their workforce to match it. So it was interesting. We talked about that, and, how we came to ideas in this area. It was helpful.
Great. So the kind of cross-sector or within a sector, the cross like concerns or focuses. Awesome. Another one I'll just read out from the chat. Our main theme, breakout session 9, showing up and doing this work was to help people have a home and be safe and receive energy efficiency measures they otherwise wouldn't have access to, as housing can have such an effect on someone's quality of life. So what I take from that is, that there's this kind of ground that you can stand on if you have a protected, warm, efficient place to live, and that a lot of other things maybe within this working group and then even beyond it related to equity and equity and inequity can spring from that. Great. Programs and how we assist agencies and customers with this working group's resources and funding. Lisa, do you want to jump in? You have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. With my group, I don't remember what number I was, but
Okay.
some of the things that we had discussed was being able to do the work because basically it was an income base, and so that's kind of how we fell into the program of doing energy work. Some of us also wanted to do the work because it had an impact for our community. We want to leave the earth and environment in a better place for our children and grandchildren. Some of us also, some of the work this work that we got into, we really wasn't sure what was going on or didn't know what it really was about. But once we got into it, we kind of enjoyed it and want to continue to help communities and assist with the energy department. And then also some of the ideas we came up with was finding ways to spread the financial income within communities, because certain members of the communities don't have a lot of time to really figure out how to increase heating within their homes or have better energy efficiency. And then lastly, we also discussed some type of neighbors to neighbors, word of mouth program in which everyone's able to kind of share information and different programs to assist within their housing department. And then also having some type of way in which organizations can also share information with each other to really spread the wealth of energy efficiency and energy waste reduction.
Thanks. And I love, I'll just hold up, like from work in other sectors, the idea of informal and formal networks of data sharing was something that I think feels really resonant in this moment when communities are often feeling somewhat fractured or isolated just simply because they're not getting out and seeing each other more. But at the same time, I know in New York City where I live, mutual aid networks have been incredibly helpful for everything from community organizing on a political level to simply saying, here are resources that you can take advantage of. And I know that if I'm in a neighborhood and I hear it from a neighbor, I'm more likely to trust it than if I get something in my mailbox or in an email that looks official. So I appreciate that a lot. It came up a little bit in my breakout 2 and group 2 was making sure that the resources are going to the right places by sharing information among different components in this sector. And there was in group 2 also, we talked a bit about like how just simply showing up for these meetings is part of showing up if this is a subject or part of the sector you're interested in, because it keeps it keeps the kind of that part of the mission moving forward. A couple other things I'll read out from the chat, although do feel free to raise your virtual hand or just jump in and speak. Utility policies that end up being punitive or otherwise untenable. So getting to unpack a little bit why something that's bad for business, bad for the economy, and bad for consumers, why do companies keep doing it? And it feels like if that data or that information about those kinds of policies was available and made clear to constituents, it might be able to change. I want to make sure I'm not leaving anything out. So while I look through the chat, would someone else like to pipe in? Yeah, Yvonne, go for it.
I was with Group 7, and all of us felt the same as coming to these meetings since they've started, is that the networking here that we have had and learning about each other and about our programs, how important that has been in the success of our programs and the nonprofits, especially in 2020. And we all felt that, our passion, we all brought our personal passion to this table, and feel that this team has been pretty vital in keeping programs running and making some of the utility programs work with the nonprofits versus the nonprofits having to work with the utility program. So we're feeling like we're really making a difference, and even though it might be a very small difference, it's not a huge sweep, but we all felt that that difference, whether it was one family or one community, that it was important.
Great, thanks. And I wonder if being able to come back to this group and then share success stories, even if they're like inch wide but mile deep success stories, then gets the information out to a larger part of the sector. So maybe this group is kind of like a point of connection that then lets that message spread, yeah.
I have a fun one, Tom Phillips and I. Tom Phillips from Habitat challenged Consumers Energy to do a holistic home program. So I think that might be a fun one to report out on one day. Awesome. It only affected 6 homeowners. What a difference we made.
Right. Yeah, it does feel like there are a lot of small scale solutions, and I know that from my experience doing arts and culture work in Detroit, that for instance, that there are a lot of, and we may have talked about this last month a little bit, but there are solutions that really work for one block, and then the desire is for those micro solutions to have a little bit broader impact by just getting the word out more and sort of using them as models. I know that in our group also, you mentioned nonprofit versus kind of more statewide or public service work or official kind of governmentally based work, I think. And that someone in our group talked about having nonprofit experience and then moving to a state agency helped see how those two parts of the sector can feed each other and what the challenges are between them. So maybe sharing that information too. It does feel like a lot of what came out of our little group was about information sharing or data sharing. One thing I'll reflect too, before we hear from a couple other people and then move into our next breakout, the idea of just a couple people in our group were in homes. They were working in people's homes, and that was a very specific, it brought a specific set of opportunities, and one really had to show up in a good, in a mindful and meaningful way to do that work, to not make those relationships go awry, but to make them really substantive. Interacting with people, interacting with contracting, and as Steve put it, it's an opportunity to learn or else to get into wrong thinking. And that felt very impactful. A couple other people in the group also, the in-person experience, perhaps with a broad range of people, was really helpful because they could then share back. 1 or 2 others would be great.
Yeah, this is Laura with NRDC. I was going to share just a couple themes from kind of our whys or what kept us going. Felt like, who's at the table. There was a lot of passion for ensuring that there are diverse, both racially and by sector, people and groups at the table, and also, continuing to grow those who are most impacted by the programs that we're working on to ensure that they have access to decision making in this space too. Was really important. I think there were also some shared themes around just information sharing and learning that we've gotten out of this group. But one thing that really resonated me that someone shared is while we have, I think, seen some early success from this group, you know, the long-term success will be really important in how these conversations and this work gets embedded into future organizational philosophies, especially when we're thinking about the utilities or the commission and commission staff, and ensuring that topics, especially like diversity and inclusion, are embedded into long-term thinking.
Great. I feel like that is really important as this work group kind of defines itself. Like, how do things get embedded that come out of these really energizing and meaningful conversations? I think that's something for me that, like, so that it doesn't just become a conversation that feels great, which is important, but then it gets to carry forward in some kind of like real embedded policy driven way. So thanks for bringing that into the room. Brianna Parker says the 7th generation principle is based on an ancient, oh, I cannot pronounce that, I'm sorry, Haudenosaunee Iroquois philosophy that the decisions we make today should result in a sustainable world 7 generations into the future. Beautiful. So that is a brilliantly deep and tall order to take on as a working group. But in a way, I know that in our group, we talked a bit about like this moment reflecting some real fissures, but also some possible, if not solutions, then just like steps that one can take, right? Because things are so stark for some people, small businesses. That was also reflected in our group, as well as individuals. And so there may be things that in those difficulties can let us think perhaps 7 generations down the line. So thanks for that as well. Is there one more person who might want to share? Yeah, Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go. First, well, look, like what Laura just mentioned, you know, as far as like changing of mindsets and thinking, you know, from the PSC perspective, one of the things that I actually mentioned in our session was how everything with this work group has kind of changed the way I think about my job. You know, when we first kicked this thing off a couple of years ago, it was, you know, I was utility oriented, and it was utility perspective, and things have changed over time. And then there is, you know, discuss how you know, things have been in the past been, you know, kind of siloed. And as Julie Cassidy said in her comment about the, you know, that there's a lot of gaps in between. Somebody goes in and does their program and walks away without fixing, you know, or making, while leaving all the rest of the problems behind, and, you know, some stuff that never gets fixed. And so, there's been a whole lot of learning, I think, at the PSC level, and certainly with me about all of the, and how to better coordinate all of these ideas. And so from that perspective, this has really helped. And I think that the utilities would say the same thing. You know, and for just a couple other things was that, that would be my dog.
I was gonna say, I know no one else's mic is on right now, so you can't pretend.
And that with certain clients, and especially with low income, or I mean, elderly clients, that, you know, there's a lot of resistance for applying for help and asking for it, or and even when it's offered to them, they don't want it. You know, both. You know, we had Andrew and Eileen from utilities were in our group, and they both have that experience going on. And, all right, I'm going to go with that.
This working group is so successful that even the domesticated animals want to get in a little bit on what keeps them warm and what they need. So I'm gonna start to move us into our second round of breakouts. Just taking a lot of what just came up, I think, as jumping off points. And then I think in our group, we already started getting into what the main thrust of these second breakouts are. But to give you a little rundown of them, they're going to be 20 minutes, so you have a little more time and a few more people. There'll be up to 10 people in a group. And then if the priorities for this working group are coordination that we talked about in December, coordination, data, and funding, then how can the people, you know, how can you suggest steps toward each priority within this working group, right? So steps toward better coordination, steps toward better data sharing, steps toward more funding. Something that Steve said in our group was that it's hard to tell if there's, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but hard to tell if there's simply not enough resources going into the sector as needed, or if they're just not being apportioned appropriately, or if it's both. So I feel like that's something that there are probably some very specific steps one could take or a group could take to try to challenge that if that's the dynamic going on. So things to think about: what are challenges to each priority? Why are they challenges? Is it about information not getting out to the right place, or is it about simply not having enough resources and needing to build more? And then what are possible pathways through? To reiterate the idea that narratives plus data gives us pathways to understanding and action. The last thing I'll say is just, I notice in this time, trying to coordinate cross-sector work or even within a sector to try to find some kind of unified way forward, whatever the challenge is that we're in this time that is very uncertain, and we're in this time where things are very urgent, right? Related to energy efficiency, climate change, equity, and all of the above. So that for me often can get in the way of taking action. And one of the things that I've found working in the arts sector and in other sectors is that the smallest step sometimes gets us moving toward that 7 generations from now. So I would say, like, if there are ways that you in this breakout room can think about, like, what are individual steps you can take that you could walk out and could be done within a typical work week, so it's not taking on a whole other part-time job. What are those small steps that, with this kind of larger vision in mind, what could they be? So in just a sec, we'll send, yes, I will put the prompt in the chat. I think that's the question, right, from Annika? Let me just make sure. Yes, I will put that prompt in the chat. I'll put all these things in. Make sure that in your group there is a timekeeper. You'll get a 5-minute and then a 1-minute warning. And make sure that there is also a note taker as well. So I'm pasting that in now. I'm going to recommend that if you're the note taker, it's 20 minutes total. Brett, thanks. And if you're the note taker, could you make 1 page for coordination, 1 page for data, 1 page for funding. And that way, if stuff starts rolling in the room, you can just apply it to the right priority. So if each group doesn't mind, if you're the note taker, just make a separate Google Doc or some other document that you can share with your group and you could even work on together that other people can enter into. Does that make sense? I'll type that into.
Hey, Aaron.
Yeah.
And maybe you did this while I was dealing with the dogs, but I was wondering if I could get Brianna Dubose and Brianna Parker to maybe flesh out the idea of coordination, funding, and data, and what are we talking about?
Great.
And before we send everybody on their way, and that may help further discussion a bit.
That's awesome. Thanks, Brad. Brianna Parker or Brianna Dubose, are you able to jump in?
Sure, good morning.
Great.
So when we look at coordination, funding, and data, when we look at the overall work group and the subtopics, we each want to really figure out how do we bring these topic areas and these elements that we've been working on within this work group to look at these subtopics of coordination of resources. How do we get funding for the programs that we are trying to move forward? And how do you get the data to support the needs for who needs to be supported? And so oftentimes we have big ideas, but we don't get down to the granular level to be able to really specifically figure out how someone can come into this system and be able to get the support from start to finish. And so when we looked at how do you get that support, it needs to be a coordination of services. A lot of times people have to hop around to different resources. How do you get the funding so that those folks that are possibly working in tandem to help support marginalized communities or individuals, that they can get the funding resources to be able to provide that person to be able to get the assistance that they need, or get the funding to those organizations to provide the support and assistance for those parties, as well as then how do we also capture that data so that when we are putting forth dockets and writing letters or appealing to the MPSC, that we are capturing the appropriate data and then prioritizing that data in a way that the needs are being addressed to the communities that need to be served. And who should be prioritized, why they're being prioritized, who is marginalized, why they're being marginalized, what the needs are, and what the needs are within that community. A lot of that Tony talked about at our last segment based upon zip codes and census tracts and things of that nature. And so trying to look at all those three areas and identifying what are the needs, either specifically within your work area, your competency, or within the work groups that we do with this EWR work group.
Great. Thanks, Brianna. I think one thing I'll just take out of that too is prioritizing the right data, getting to the right sources or right people so that it's used properly, because data can seem so broad. So I really appreciate that clarification of exactly how data is a priority here. Are there questions before we, sorry, there's one in chat. Are there other questions people want to raise before we go in? Are we talking about diversity and inclusion, or is that later? I want to let Brad or Brianna answer, although if you don't want to answer, I have a thought, but you know this group better than I.
Brianna, why don't you go ahead?
Did you say Brianna or me?
Brianna.
Yes, we want to consider equity as part of this as well.
Great.
This is
yeah,
I'm sorry, Aaron. This is Scott Allen Davis. So Brianna Duval, how are you? Good to see you.
Good, thank you.
I'm now very confused. So when we say within this topic, what topic are we really talking about? I feel like we got off one train and got on another one, and I thought I was paying attention, and maybe I blacked out. I'm not sure, but I'm a little. I'm sorry. I'm a little confused. So when you say how to prioritize certain data given this group's focus, what's the focus that we're talking about at this point in this breakout session?
Energy waste reduction for low income.
Oh, so we did drop the diversity conversation. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Well, I thought we were talking about how data within an energy waste reduction context can also help us work toward racial equity. So maybe we do need more clarity about the parameters of the topic, because my understanding is we're still throughout this conversation today talking about racial equity.
We are, but it's to be applied to this topic group.
Is that enough clarity, or do you feel like you need more?
Well, and those are to those three areas: coordination, funding, and data?
Yes.
Go ahead, Brad.
Well, I was, and I think, and I may be getting this wrong, but we take coordination, funding, and data with the pre-existing topic groups that we've have been ongoing, one form or another, and bringing in the element of equity and diversity into that, and tying that all together with coordination, funding, and data. Does that make sense, Brianna?
Yeah, that's what we talked about initially, is that we're trying to bring in the equity piece into bringing in coordination, funding, and data into the work groups that were already initially part of the EWR overall work group. And so that's where we're trying to bring more specificity into this discussion, making equity at the forefront, combining it with those three areas: coordination, resources, and funding.
So maybe just to make sure that everybody's clear, and I'm clear too, I'm sorry if I took us off track, but that it's about these three priorities: coordination, data, and funding within this working group that then filters out, that helps address equity within the existing working groups as they are. So there's kind of like a 2 or 3 step process, yeah?
Yes, if that's too confusing, we can narrow it down, but the focus was still with this particular topic today. We were talking about the equity piece, but bringing it into this work group and then looking at those 3 categories.
Great. Thanks for those clarifying questions. And I'm going to suggest that we move into the breakout groups, and then those of us who are taking notes and reflecting can also try to help clarify if there's still lingering questions. Yeah? Okay, great. Alexis, I think we are ready.
Hi all. You want me to get started going here? I'll try to take notes. If anybody else wants to take some notes also, that would be helpful because I'm not good at it. So is everybody clear on, you know, how we're framing this discussion?
There's a
I
lot
gotta
to
say,
cover.
yeah, it's a lot to cover, and I'm still a little confused about what our priority in this conversation should be.
When and to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not entirely. It seemed like an awful lot to me too, but you know, and the way I'm thinking about it is in if we take how do you know, as far as coordination and the funding, and the funding is a tough one and it's a great big chunk of topic, but also you know, using some data for, you know, we have the previous, all the topic groups, you know, which were multifamily, you know, the weatherization EWR programs, health and safety, the outreach and engagement, funding, which was a whole topic to itself, and then affordability. And how do we insert the dynamic of equity and inclusion into that? And that's kind of the way that I've been understanding it. And if anybody has, you know, a different perspective, you know, throw it out there, because and then, you know, utilizing the coordination and data, you know, to further the goal.
Brad, are they asking us to identify funding sources here? I'm a little confused about that too. I'm like, funding for what and how?
It's not, you're not the only one. I think funding is too big. I mean, we could spend the whole 20 minutes just talking about funding and where it comes from and who's paying for what and how to close gaps, I think. And so,
Is he looking for some information and can tie the funding, the data with the networking and coordination of different programs together? That's the feeling that I got, but all of these feel like they could be a meeting on their own, and in 20 minutes like, I just feel like we have the coordination, we're here. Are there better steps to tighten this coordination up? And it's been really difficult this past year, I think, for all of us in the coordination side, and reaching out and trying to touch these nonprofits that some closed and some you couldn't contact because they weren't even issued cell phones, and now they can't even go to their office. It's been a challenging year. So like, I'm overwhelmed right now by that list.
I know, I am too.
And maybe that's what we take back. Our first step is that we need to shorten down our that first step, that priority that we feel that we need to do, because we are all professionals in what we're doing and we're doing a kick butt job on it, but we're overwhelmed by this list. So I'm sure we're not the only ones. Big programs going on.
No, I agree that I'm sure every group is having this discussion right now. That it's a lot, and And so I'm writing.
Okay.
So this is Diane. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Diane.
So, and I apologize because I was on the meeting, I jumped in on the phone, then now I got to my office and I'm back on, so I may have missed a few snippets here and there. But when people were seeking clarification before, I'm trying to like get to the core of what's underlying all of this. And so I may be way off base here, but I thought the idea was, how could we use data to help better integrate things and seek layered or braided or some kind of coordinated funding. And I thought that was like the end goal. Now, that doesn't mean I understand what exactly we're supposed to do in this breakout, but is that the correct end goal?
So we use data to find out what the priorities are. We then figure out where the funding is coming from, and then we coordinate with either other utilities or with nonprofits or with government. Is that kind of how do we go about doing that? Is that?
I mean, I think part of my interpretation was similar to what you said, but what we're trying to do is put together a big picture that reflects what the world would be like if we were coordinating resources, and then using just like any grant, and then using the data that we've examined to present that picture so that we could basically have a case for support for further funding or integrated funding or blended funding or something. Now that's, again, my interpretation, but I think the bigger question is, to get to that, what kind of data should we be looking at? And then, and that's a whole separate thing. I agree with, what Yvonne said, is that looking at the data to identify stuff is one thing, but I think before we go to look to identify, we need to say, okay, we want to look at, the coordination of energy efficiency, weatherization, senior home repair, low income home repair, like all these different programs, and see what commonalities there are. And ways we can, braid it, twist it, leverage it together. Now, again, I might be way off base here.
No, I think you're onto something. And then, so the data is coming from where? From federal government or from Michigan, state of Michigan?
Well, yeah, I think what is the data is a real good question. We don't know what the data is, and that's why I think if we identify a couple key areas of, okay, in the end, we want our case support, our case study or our case for support to include some big main things, low income, energy efficiency, weatherization, whatever we decide those, 3 things, 5 things, 10 things are. And then we look at all that data together and say, okay, where are we commonly serving people? Where could we better work together? What data are we missing is always a big thing that comes up. We look and look and look, and sometimes we don't stop to say, hey, this isn't anywhere, and then reach out to say, does anybody know where this data is? Every time I've asked that question, turns out the data doesn't exist, and then we got to do another activity, to get the data. But I think there's a lot of data, and when you talked about Yvonne being overwhelmed, it's really easy when you start looking at data to get very overwhelmed if you don't have, kind of a defined outline or defined goals of what data questions you're seeking to answer. Because you can look at all kinds of data, but, what does it mean and what do you need it to mean for you? I mean, what my agency might look at might be different things than what you're looking at from the same data set, and that's okay. But in the end, there's probably some commonality because we're serving similar people.
Is the end result for this supposed to be what data we can use to prove we need more funding to someone? I'm not sure who the someone is or where that funding would come, you know what I mean? So I'm just trying to wrap our arms around what is the end result we want, and if we need to dissect going backwards. Well, we want to be here, but how do we get there is the where is it that we want to end up at the end?
Well, I wanted to share some, some thoughts I have, recently regarding the EWR for low income program, for low income community, because I think the goal of the EWR is to save energy usage, right? To save, reduce carbon emission. And also include, and as a low income community, we need to think about equity and inclusion to help them generate, say, energy expense savings. So that's our goal. We have to combine them together. The problem that how to help those low income families better, especially in the EWR topic. But the problem I noticed today is the disconnection between different functions, like we mentioned, the data gap. Like say now I work for City of Ann Arbor, we are designing a program to help low-income communities to replace their energy-intensive appliances with high energy efficiency appliances, say heat pumps. Like because for Ann Arbor, based on the census data, that's one piece of data. Census data, we have over 20% of households, they are still using all electric heat resistances. So even though, under now the electricity price is much higher than natural gas, but if we could help those families to replace their HVAC with the heat pump, it would generate a significant saving for those families. But the problem we are facing is that we don't know who they are. Utility have those data, right? Utility have those energy intensive clients data, but we cannot access that. As a city, we may have access to like the income data. So if we could connect them together, we could pinpoint those families, who maybe they are frequently behind the utility payments and they are energy intensive users, and then they are low income as well. So then if they fit that criteria, and then as a city or utility, we could help them to pour the money, from federal and state to help them, to replace those appliances. Today, I look at the programs we have, like say our utilities DTE, the weatherization program for low-income family is very minimal. It helps, if you switch the shower head or faucet with, water-saving faucet, or to do like to replace the light bulbs. Those helps, but those are not significant. So for those families, they need significant help. They need a lot of upfront cost. But in the long run, think about the heating bill saving. They could save like 60% of their heating bills. So in the long run, it would be more beneficial, if you do like a deep upfront incentivize, than just to provide some basic weatherization assistance. So that's what I'm thinking. But then to design this kind of program, the information, the barrier we have now is first, how to connect the energy usage data with the income data together, how to connect that piece. Secondly, the funding source. And I look at the funding source, we have like over 100 millions of funds from federal, every year to Michigan to support energy assistance, but most of them go to bill payment assistance. So, but I think the priority should be focused on energy saving instead of paying bills, right? Because if your bill shrinks to 1/3, you may not have the payment delay problem, right? So how then we should look at the priority. How should we utilize those federal and state fundings? And as a ratepayer, we also contribute to the EWR funding to our utilities. So then, how could we prioritize the usage of those funding? Now majority of those pieces goes to bill assistance program to help those families to pay bills. But I think that's important, but the key, the root is to help them, save energy usage dramatically, significantly. But that requires a huge amount of upfront cost.
Fang, this is Denise Allard. We have a pilot going on that is looking at payment troubled customers, folks that are having trouble paying their bills. And then we are giving them energy efficiency services through our low income program. And this is like a 2-year effort. We're trying to figure out exactly what you just said. Does like giving somebody a new furnace, hot water tank, insulation, how does that impact their ability or their willingness to pay? So you might have a customer whose bill drops 50%, and we're trying to figure out if that made them pay their bills on time more often. So we do have something like that. We're studying it now.
Yeah, so maybe we could connect later after the meeting, to talk about that.
Yeah, this is I don't run that program, but I've certainly, there's another person on this call that literally is running the trouble payment.
And Yvonne's running it for consumers.
Yeah, but we don't have customers in the Ann Arbor area. But Fang, both consumers and DTE are currently running a cold climate heat pump program for income qualified that you may want to reach out if you've got customers using electric resistant heat. And see, this is where I see us. Fang's talking about having a cold climate heat pump program in Ann Arbor, and the utility is running one also. So we're going to keep our customers because we have goals to meet with MPSC on this cold climate heat pump program. And I don't know if I'm sure you're aware that you have one, but
heat pumps, yeah, we have a pilot going on now. We've had to pay 100% of the cost of these heat pumps to
we're doing the same
people
thing.
to put them in.
Yeah.
And then
Consumers, Denise, Consumers is doing the exact same pilots as you are, because they have the exact same interveners.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying, though, is at this table right now, we have Fang, who doesn't know that program's going on right in her community with her utility. So these are the places, these are, maybe some of the smaller steps that we can take is to continue to have these open discussions at these meetings. That's maybe we started out that way when we were in the same room. I think that the sidebar conversations and the passion and the just like, oh, grab this person, we're kind of missing that. So, but
we're trying to see if, does it work? Does energy efficiency really lower their bill? Sometimes you also have behavior involved, right? Oh, I got all this new equipment. Instead of putting the heat at 68, it's going back up to 80 because I'm cold. You know what I mean? So sometimes that is also part of it. Like trying to, we're going to be comparing, bills and, like pre and post treatment. So that will be interesting to see, because we have had, I have had where people have gotten new things and they just do different behaviors because they know they have better equipment. Interesting, but.
Yeah, it's good to know, because I cannot find very good information regarding that part by my own. Thank you so much.
I guess we're being summoned back to the room.
Brad is a great resource too. If you have questions, I've seen Brad filter questions to us. So Fang, if you had a question about a program, shoot it to Brad and then he sends it out to the correct utility and then we can connect with you directly. So that's been very helpful with, Brad doing that in the past and making those connections.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because then I know where it needs to go, and who to contact directly.
Right. Good luck with reporting out on this this list we had.
Yeah,
maybe we just go back to that frustration.
I just tried to write down everything Diane said.
I think we are back. Yeah. So we're going to take just about 10 minutes to maybe quickly introduce some of the things that came up in each group. Our group had a really rich conversation. There's way more than we could get into, like a 2-minute introduction. So Brad and Brianna, I just want to suggest that like we can maybe do a debrief afterward too. Not right after, but at a few, as we plan January, because there's a lot of good ideas. Would that be okay with you all? Okay. So could we just start with whichever group wants to share out just like 1 or 2 things that were substantive that came out of your conversations in these last 20 minutes? And trust that what we don't get to today, we'll get to in the coming meetings.
So I'll go. I was in group 5, and the initial response is that we were completely overwhelmed by the questions, and we discussed about how to tighten tighten it down a little bit so it's a little more manageable and we can take off little smaller pieces at a time. But we had, it was trying to identify how can we use the data to, we were kind of make sense of how we use data to prioritize, coordinate, develop funding, and a big picture idea of how to go, to do that. But the questions of what is the data, what should it contain? Are we looking for EWR, low income, equity data, energy usage, and identify funding sources and eligibility? And what data questions are we looking to answer? So we asked a lot of questions, really, is what came out of our group. And how, and looking at coordination of programs, utility programs, municipality programs, some of this, what we've been doing here with all the people who participate, the different groups that participate, and how to, and the integration of programs and activities that are going on. So that's kind of a quick synopsis for our group.
Great, thanks. Could another group just go so we get them all in the room?
I can go, and my fellow group members feel free to jump in. I'm not sure I'm capturing all of these things accurately. So we talked about on the data front a lot, that data collection varies so much by utilities or by community. Some might have collected, racially disaggregated data, and others may have not. So, and utilities might not be, they might be hesitant to release that data for various reasons. We talked about coordinating EWR programs with other healthy homes programs and some of the challenges that come with that, especially since we rely so much on federal programs. For example, the federal weatherization and federal lead programs don't necessarily work well together, and so things just end up not being funded. So we also talked about maybe a Medicaid pilot to quantify the health impact and healthcare savings of energy efficiency for people with high Medicaid utilization, to start to collect some of that data, very much along the lines of what consumers and Habitat have been working on. And then in terms of funding, we talked about the fact that electric utilities can't spend their EWR dollars for savings in gas and vice versa, because that's an official state policy, and how that might need to be changed and what we can do there. I think that's it. Does anyone else have anything that I missed that should be brought up?
We talked about lead abatement coordination, but again, running into the federal money. challenges and the community development block grant areas that are being identified in cities, because those are generally targeted at our reach demographics and low-income population.
Yeah, so cities that have used those funds for EWR might have that racially disaggregated data.
Yeah,
but
yeah, pretty
cities
sure
that,
they do.
Yeah, cities that haven't wouldn't necessarily have that data.
And that's how they, like, you know, in order for Lansing to get the large lead abatement grant, they obviously had to supply that kind of information.
Great, thanks, y'all. Could someone from our group go?
Yeah, can I'll go through it. Because I thought there were some really great things from our group. I'll start with, first, we talked about data. We talked about making sure that the decision makers from the Public Service Commission and down have a diverse background, and also the way we look at data. We talked about how many times the homes that we're working in aren't valued. You know, that we're putting more value, you know, in the services we put into these homes than the actual, you know, retail value of the home is. But there is value in the generations of families that are living in there, and we need to figure out how to capture that, right? Because that's important to these families. It's important to the community, and there's more to it than just looking at a number on a data sheet that this house isn't worth saving, for instance. And then we talked about something that's very real and that this group might work on, and this is inspired by Steve Christensen's talk yesterday in Detroit. Weatherization programs, the federal government has increased funding, and so there's going to be this massive effort here in 2021, how to allocate that money, how to use that money, how to modernize the weatherization program, how to incorporate solar, health and safety. There's all kinds of really interesting opportunities with that program, and how to make it better, and how to make it better tied to all these other programs. And how do we, you know, if Wayne Metro, I'm going to use you, Steve, can digitize all the information they collect, they could probably share it with the state, and the state can start to make better decisions on how to allocate the money, right? And that's a very simple, not a simple task, but a simple way to, you know, make these programs better.
Great, thanks. We have a couple more groups, so feel free to just jump in.
Well, and Tim, I'll say something real quick too, because we did talk a little bit about that. First of all, not everyone in our group was in last month's meeting, so he gave us an overview, and that's where we learned that, you know, there was you know, Brianna Parker provided some narrative information, and Tony Reeves provided some data. Dr. Tony Reeves provided some data about energy poverty, and so we got to thinking about what kind of data should we think about collecting, knowing that some things the client can work on, but some things are very intentional systems outside their control. So what kind of data should we be gathering to try to address those? We talked about, we know that targeted arrearage data would be very helpful to help us understand who needs, you know, who's using what, how much. We also talked about maybe further on energy use, you know, lowest income, highest usage. These are folks that we need to think about, because they're the folks that would benefit specifically. Back to what Tim mentioned about what we talked about yesterday at another meeting, you know, we know deadlines are coming. We know, you know, we're going to be doing an RFP with this increased stimulus funding. And we always talk about funding opportunities, but let's also talk about who do we want to make sure shows up for these RFP opportunities. So yeah, we know when they're coming, but let's think about making sure we get folks that we want to be engaged showing up. So the data of just knowing when it is one thing, but we also want to know who's been responding and who do we want to respond. We also talked about grantees and utility programs connecting, and how that data needs to be shared. And then we also talked about outreach. How are we reaching people? What works best to reach people, and how are people most comfortable communicating back to us?
Awesome. Thanks. Anyone else from that group need to add anything in? If not, then we should move on. I know there's at least one other group, yeah.
Yes, this is Gina Swedenberg from Cadmus. I'll report out on the group 3. We talked about during the coordination discussion about a topic that came up when this low-income working group was originally conceived, about creating some sort of centralized database to connect all the different programs and people collaborating in these groups. That has, the networking alone was seen as a really big benefit to the folks in our group, and having some sort of centralized source of how those people can all be connected, whether it be a map that shows all the different services being provided in different parts of Michigan and by whom, or some sort of logic model that can show how all these different, that maps out what all these different organizations are hoping to get out of participating in this group, and mapping out those connections and how they can be made with one another. And then when we got to the data discussion, there were some elements that tie on to what some of the other groups talked about. Basically, how do you measure success of these programs? Traditionally with utilities, they have thought mainly in the terms of funding spent and savings earned, but are there other metrics for success that consider diversity, equity, and inclusion, reaching hard to reach businesses that might be in low-income communities? How do you really suss out what the obstacles are for participation in low-income EWR programs, and then create new performance indicators to show how you've been having success beyond just earned savings?
Great.
That's really good, Gina. Thank you.
And is there, I think there's one more group? Or are we got everybody? Okay. I know we're at time, so I want to, or even just a little over, so I want to just turn it over to Brad, and trust that if you send us links to your notes, we can coordinate this, and we'll make sure we get, we'll get everything. There's something in chat too. I don't think our group, and sounds like other, really got deep into the diversity and equity pieces during the second breakout. We should ensure that it's more intentional in the next meeting. And I got some private feedback that that's true also, and I'm sure that that is something we can even just address as a group in the next meeting as a whole. So thank you for that.
I see that some of the links are in the chat, but otherwise, if you want to, if anybody else wants to just email me directly, I can get them out and I'll get them put up on the web page. I'll get the information of the chat out to everybody. This was a fast and furious session, and I think that I kind of suspected it was going to be coming into it. But it's really helpful for clarification purposes and kind of how some ideas of kind of establishing some objectives for moving this forward, some if you can be thinking we'll do the February kickoff with more focus on this, and we'll do it kind of in a subtopic group meeting. And our regular meeting will be back again in March. So it can be thinking about and sending some ideas in about thoughts for what we can do, continuing to take this forward between June and February, and we'll start exploring some of those ideas and then tying those into the existing topic groups, and I put those into the chat. So thanks all for participating. I think this is great. And is there anybody else have anything else they want to add right now? Brianna Dubose or Brianna Parker, you want to add anything?
No, just thank you for everyone being very engaging with the breakout rooms, and we look forward to continuing to work on this work, and have a great day.
Thanks all. And I'll just say, I'm hearing some of the chat feedback around more directly addressing diversity and equity and race. And so as a kind of smaller team, maybe we can, I just want to reflect that that's in the room. So, and I would certainly appreciate being able to talk about it as a small group, so that when we see each other in February, we can figure out how to go deeper into that specific part of this subject, if that's all right.
So everybody will get the invitation to the February meeting. And so know where and when. And I'll be getting a calendar invitation out here pretty quickly. Alexis, don't hang up until I've had a chance to get the information off of the chat, please. And I just really just kind of following up on what Tim and Steve Christensen were talking about, and the changes coming with the weatherization program. And it looks like, and when we get more detail of that, and the people at the Bureau of Community Action gets more specifics on some apparently some health and safety and non-energy benefits may be able to be included in that. But when the specifics of that come out, then we will be letting everybody else know as well. So with that, thanks everybody for participating, and I'll let you go.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Brad, I'll just leave it open for like another 10 minutes so you can
Okay.
get done whatever you need to do.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep.
Aaron, we'll follow up with you offline. I was waiting for a couple other folks to drop off, but I'll catch up with you. Thank you.
Thanks. I would love to check in soon just to debrief on this, and then that sounds good.
Totally. Okay, thanks. We'll connect.
Care.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Alexis.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, Alexis. Bye.
Welcome. Bye.